Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Donald Sanderson. I'm chair of the West Parry Sound Recreation and Cultural Center Board, and I would like to call to order the open meeting of February 8th, 2023 at 7:26 p.m. I would hereby provide notice to the public that there was a closed meeting prior to this open session, and that on a resolution moved by Reeve Liverance and seconded by Mayor McGarvey, that pursuant to section 239 subsection 2 and 3 of the Municipal Act S0 SO 2001 clause 25 as amended, the West Parry Sound Recreation and Culture Center Board moved into council, closed to the public in order to address matters pertaining to Item K, a position, plan, procedure, criteria, or instruction to be applied to any negotiations carried on or to be carried on by or on behalf of the municipality or local board. And that was duly carried. I'd like to now move to item 1.2, which is addition to the agenda. So is there anything that members would like to add to this evening's agenda? Hearing none, may I have a mover and a seconder for the approval of the agenda? Moved by Reeve Liverance, seconded by Mayor Moore, that the agenda for the February 8th, 2023 West Parry Sound Recreation and Culture Center Board is hereby approved as circulated. All in favor? Opposed, if any? And that matter is carried. Thank you. Item 1.4 is declaration of pecuniary interest. Are there any pecuniary interest to declare this evening? Seeing none, we'll move to item 1.5, which is the approval of the minutes. May I have a mover and a seconder for the approval of the minutes? Moved by Mayor McGarvey, seconded by Councillor Fellner, that the minutes of the December 14th, 2022 West Parry Sound Recreation and Culture Center Board are hereby approved as circulated. All in favor? Opposed, if any? And that matter is carried. Thank you very much. Moving to item 2 business, the chair's verbal report. There's been, as in previous months, considerable work has been conducted in between our last meetings. And I would like to express on your behalf, my appreciation to members of the steering committee who have worked diligently in a number of matters that will be reported this evening, as well to thank Clerk Rebecca Johnson for keeping us organized. And this evening we'll be hearing as well from Director of Finance Stephanie Phillips with respect to financial matters. So I would like to thank them for their continued support, and that concludes my verbal update. In terms of item 2.2, there were no items from the closed session to come back into the open meeting, and we will therefore move to item 2.3, which is the partner funding request, a report submitted by the steering committee. And I would ask Mr. Harris if there's anything specifically that he would like to draw to our attention.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We prepared a cash flow forecast for the duration of the project. We wanted to understand the timing of expenses and how that relates to the reimbursement of ISEP and identify any concerns. With the architects on board, the project manager has given us some cash flow assumptions going forward. Those assumptions are in the report, and I'll just review them so you understand the context in which the numbers I'm going to refer to, how they were derived. So as I mentioned, the project managers provided a cash flow for the project. We've also added in some assumptions regarding some refurbishment of the existing YMCA building and some minimal, but still some operating costs that the board will incur, but aren't part of the ICIP project. We've assumed quarterly reimbursements from ISEP. The transfer payment agreement with the board says that they will reimburse us annually. That's kind of a boilerplate position the ISEP takes. We approached them and asked if we could get a quarterly reimbursement. And again, it was the individual that we were dealing with in terms of the scope of the project, and they've approved the board getting quarterly reimbursements for expenses. So that helps from a cash flow perspective. So what we've assumed is we'll get quarterly reimbursement from ISIP 1 quarter in arrears. The $5 million in sponsorship and fundraising dollars, we've assumed in the cash flow that would be received in September of 2023. The RFP that's currently on the street states that the successful proponent will be required to have their major capital sponsorships identified and contracted by September 2023, unless otherwise advised. So that was the basis for us putting in the $5 million in September. When we go through the recommendations in the report, we'll have some further comments on that. Number 4, the objective is to have at least 1 month's cash flow on hand at any point in time. And what we see is that by the summer of 2023, cash flows, expenses on a monthly basis are about $1.5 billion. So the timing of expenses may accelerate, may be delayed. We may want to order earlier than planned aspects, equipment related to the project that are supply chain issues, and we might want to have them order them early. We might have to pay some money early. So the cash flow can change. And since the cash flow is roughly $1.5 million a month, we wanted to have $1.5 million in addition on hand to accommodate fluctuations in cash flow. We always want to be in a position to pay all the expenses related to the project. We've assumed, in the absence of other information, we've just assumed that the renovations required on the existing YMCA building will be incurred evenly over time. So what, with this information, that was the assumptions. What's the cash flow telling us? As I mentioned, it's telling us we're going to be spending $1.5 million a month. Based on all the assumptions, the project will not have sufficient cash flow starting in around August 2024. So with the assumptions, including the $5 billion in September of 2023 from fundraising, we're going to have some cash flow challenges in August of 2024, which we'll come back to the board later and provide some suggestions how to get around that. This cash flow also is based on full partner contributions being received by the end of March. And so part of the recommendation of this report is for the board to request the third and final installment of the financial commitments of each of the funding partners. And as mentioned, the project's cash flow is heavily reliant on sponsorship and fundraising. $5 million in capital from sponsorship and fundraising. And we've got $6 million yet to collect from the funding partner. So the magnitude of fundraising and sponsorship is comparable to the funding that the municipal partners are providing. So it's both are significant funding sources for this project. So the recommendation is that the board send a request to the funding partners to submit the balance of their financial commitment to the project by March 31st. Attachment 2 to this report outlines each municipality's contribution, what was approved, monies submitted to date, and the balance. The second recommendation, that the importance of the timely receipt of capital monies from sponsorship and fundraising be conveyed to the fundraising team. They haven't seen this cash flow. I mean, if they've reviewed the agenda, they would have, but I think it's important that they understand the importance of the cash flow from fundraising and how that ties into the cash flow for the overall project, and that the fundraising team confirm the anticipated timing of receipts of funds. We've assumed, and that was just based on the RP information, if the actual cash in hand is different than the September 2023 that we've included in the cash flow, we need to understand what the expectation is for cash then in hand. And that was it, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. I'd like to read the resolution, then ask for a mover and a seconder, and then we will to get it on the table for discussion, please. The resolution reads that the board send a request to the funding partners to submit the balance of their financial commitment to the project by March 31st, 2023, and that the importance of the timely receipt of capital monies from sponsorship and fundraising be conveyed to the fundraising team, and that the fundraising team confirm the anticipated timing of receipts of funds. May I have a mover and a seconder for that resolution? Moved by Mayor McGarvey, seconded by Councillor Fellner. Any questions? Councillor Fellner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To Mr. Harris. Mr. Harris, so once construction's commenced, and I would assume that the project manager would issue a progress payment certificate monthly, does the issuance of that progress payment certificate, does that trigger your ability to collect the portion from the grant funding for that particular month? Is that how that's done?
Through the chair, I'll provide a comment, and I'll ask our director of finance for the town to maybe, if she wants to, if there's anything to add. I think we have to have paid the bill, issued a check. Okay. And I'll ask Ms. Phillips if there's anything she would like to add to that.
Yes, that's correct. So really, we will have had to have paid the bill, and then also they request that those bills which have been paid are cleared. So we actually have to prove that people cleared the checks as a part of that requirement, but that's really generally what's required.
Okay, and then it's net from say they make us file a stat deck for payment of accounts or what have you. Then it's what net how many days is this board going to finance 100% of the project before we're repaid for the grant portion?
Mr. Chairman, the transfer payment agreement says they'll reimburse us after a year. And that was a standard agreement. That was a standard agreement that, we didn't get a chance to comment on or edit. But as I mentioned, Ms. Phillips contacted ISUP and said, it doesn't work for this project for us to wait a year. They agreed to reimburse us quarterly. So this cash flow analysis is based on us being one quarter, which 3 months in arrears.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Dobro.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Harris, just looking at the proposed expenditures here, originally when we spoke, we talked about the YMCA building grant. And I see that's on the paper, but there's no funds shown for that. And that seemed to be somewhat pivotal in how we were approaching the old Y building as to what its structure was and everything else. And I'm just looking at this from the point of view that if we get into this and we have issues on building site, design, everything like that, where are we going to be going with this? How are we going to do our cash flow at that point in time? It seems like we've put the onus on getting the building renovated. And I'm just wondering, that's works out to $1 million. And if that starts, will we be there ahead of time with all of the geophysical examinations and everything so that we can assure our ratepayers that this is actually going to go ahead on that site? I know this is a proposed financial agreement, but I'm just looking at it and saying, Where do we say no, or where do we say yes, the move ahead? If you can answer that, please.
Through the chair, do you mean move ahead with the YMCA?
Correct.
The revised financial plan that was taken to the board at the time we did the descoping included $1 million estimated renovations for the YMCA. So that's built into the plan. What's not been built into the plan is, and potential good news, is that project, the existing YMCA renovations, the renovations to the existing building, is eligible for grants. We've not reflected that some of that million might be funded through grants. We've not reflected that yet because we haven't confirmed there's a grant stream available that this project would qualify and that we will get it. So that's a potential upside to the cash flow forecast that's in front of you.
Chairman, if I could, to further that, worst case scenario, if for some reason we run into a scenario with the building site, are we 100% committed that we have to continue there? Or is there a contingency plan that we can take the funds that are being allocated to this project and put them elsewhere?
Through the chair, I think practically, realistically, an alternate site isn't an option. When I mentioned if we want to change aspects of the build, we need to go to ISIP and get their approval. Changing locations is probably one of the biggest asks that you could ask for ISIP to agree to. And it also puts in jeopardy, if they were to even consider that, it puts in jeopardy the ability to complete the project because we would have spent money on this site and need to respend other monies on another site and still have the project completed by the end of the grant timeframe, which is, I think, the spring of 2027. So there are contingencies built into the budget that has been brought forward. And I would, the project manager may want to speak to contingencies, but there are contingencies built in. I would say that moving locations is not practical at this point. There's issues of Indigenous consultation, climate issues. There's a whole gamut of other issues if you're revisiting site selection.
Thank you for that. It was just a question that if I'm presenting this to my ratepayers, I want to make sure that we do have some contingencies in place, that we're not putting good money after bad. That was the sole purpose of that question. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Mr. Harris. Mayor Moore.
Through the chair, I guess we're fairly new on council, and our treasurer's been away for a few weeks. He should be back shortly, but we haven't had any budget discussions at all. And I'm just asking, I guess, up front, whether there are any other meetings between now and March, whether there is one scheduled for February or middle of March or early March.
Members of meetings of the steering committee, Mayor Moore, or of the board?
No, just dealing with this particular board itself, because dealing with this particular resolution. Again, we haven't got any feedback internally, and we certainly have to do that, I think, before we could agree to something like this. And I'd be asking for a little stay, maybe a recorded vote at this point that I might be asking for, just so that we can at least talk to our treasurer and he can brief the council on the procedure. He's been away, as I said, for a period of time, so we have no update at all other than what we're receiving here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Does any member of the steering committee have a comment to make with respect to providing the information to bring the treasurer of McKellar up to speed?
Well, to the chair, these commitments by all the municipalities were made in September 2021. The municipality signed off, and the board gave the board the authority to execute the agreement with the federal provincial government. So I don't think there's I think there's an obligation for the area municipalities to all finalize their contributions. If it's a question of we need time to organize that financing, the board might consider, instead of March 31st, April 30th. I don't think the month is, nothing hinges on that, but it's just important to get it in place and the urgency of it.
Thank you. Does that meet your needs, Mayor Moore?
I think that's excellent. I appreciate that because, as I say, he should be back. We haven't heard from him for a while, but just so that he could go through the process with us. We have new people on council.
Okay.
If I could maybe add something, Mr. Chairman, and
yes,
we're
Mr.
happy to sit and meet with Rashawn and answer any questions, provide any information. He's been, at points, he's been involved in the process, and we're just more than happy to provide whatever information he might need, or Ina for that matter.
Thank you. Councillor Adober, I see that Mayor Robinson has his hand up. Perhaps to this, is your comment or question with respect to Mayor Moore's, or is it something separate?
Thank you, Chairman. It is actually in relation to what Mayor Moore was stating. And I was just wondering if I'm in the same situation with the information exchange and what's going on and trying to keep current with what's there. Would it be proper to ask if we can be put on the email list for the steering committee's minutes? That might help answer some of these questions prior to the meeting. That's my question. Thank you.
Mr. Harris?
Through the chair, I think I'm not sure what the information is. I mean, the steering committee's minutes are staff minutes that typically don't get distributed. And each municipality has their CAO is represented on the steering committee. And I mean, there's an opportunity for the steering committee to meet with the mayor and council and keep them apprised of what's going on without, relying on the minutes.
So is it fair to say then that councillors could reach out to their respective CAOs to be updated on the work of the steering committee and share minutes if they deem appropriate?
Well, through the chair, I think when staff minutes are circulated to politicians and municipalities, and where they end up, then you're writing minutes that need to be politically correct and watch the words you use. Like it takes on a whole different context than just trying to convey what the discussion was, so that each of the CAOs are clear what the decisions were, and without worrying about wordsmithing or misinterpretation of how the minutes are. We don't capture minutes like we do here at the meeting. You have the minutes, there's a motion, and that's what's in the minutes. Ours are discussion based, and I think if they're going to be circulated essentially publicly, then the wording of those minutes is going to become scaled back and not as easy for each of us, the CAOs, to interpret.
I will leave it then to the members of this committee and their respective CAOs to be briefed in the most appropriate way that they deem. And Mayor Robinson has been waiting patiently.
Thank you, Chair Sanderson. It was just a comment. I think it was partially answered there, but our understanding is the steering committee is made up of the 6 CAOs. Have all 6 municipalities been represented at these meetings by the CAOs? To Mr. Harris.
Through the chair, we have the terms of reference, if you like, for the steering committee are the 6 CAOs, and we have someone from First Nations, Wissahickon, has been appointed as well, and there's a spot for an appointment from Shawniga. They refer to them as the band manager. That position is vacant, and so there's no one attending from Shawniga. So it's the CAOs and the 2 First Nations are represented at the steering committee. And I would say 99% of the time, all of the CAOs are certainly in attendance.
And my expectation based on that, and that was the attendance that I was asking about. My expectation there was the CAOs are attending these meetings. They would have the heads up for this funding forecast. I would expect the CAOs are going back to the municipality and speaking to their treasurers and giving them a heads up in terms of this. So this shouldn't really catch anyone by surprise, I wouldn't think, in the normal course of action by the way the steering committee is operating. I know certainly in McDougall's case, this doesn't come as a surprise because our CAO has been keeping our treasurer, our CFO advised, and in terms of that funding flow. So anyway, I'm a little hesitant to have any delays in terms of the way you forecast your funding because things can happen pretty fast once you start into this. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments. Any other questions or comments? All right, are you ready for the vote? There's a resolution moved by Mayor McGarvey and seconded by Councillor Fellner. I'll call the vote. All in favor?
Could I ask for a recorded vote? Sorry.
Yes, you may. And I will ask for the assistance of Clerk Johnson to call a recorded vote. I think, Ms. Johnson, I believe we may be having some difficulty hearing you.
Can you hear me now?
Thank you.
Thank you. Archipelago Reeve, Bert Liverance.
Yay.
Carling Councillor Al DeBro.
Yay.
McDougall Mayor Dale Robinson.
Yes.
McCullough Mayor David Moore.
No.
Parry Sound Mayor Jamie McGarvey.
Yes.
Seguin Councillor Terry Fellner.
Yay.
Okay, so with the weighted system with McKellar at 1 vote, it is 11-1.
Thank you very much, and that resolution is carried. Thank you, Clerk Johnson. The next item is a matter of the delegation of authority, and that has been submitted to the steering committee, and I believe that CAO Jason Inwood will be taking us through that document. Good evening.
Good evening, Chair Sanderson, members of the board. I just realized from a staff meeting earlier today, I have a background that I didn't intend on having. I apologize. There, that's a little bit better. The report presented this evening outlines a series of escalation matters related to authority. As it stands today, the steering committee, the project manager have no authorities to advance the project without coming back to the board for seeking full approval, and that will prove to be very, very challenging as this project continues to ramp up in moving towards construction. So just as a bit of a background, the board will recall, or maybe you don't, but the project will be moving through a construction manager at risk process, which essentially means that not only will construction be happening in phases, but the project budget will be developed sequentially through the coming months. So as the project budget is developed, we'll be bringing this back to the board for their approval. Further, any scope changes in this recommendation will see, and specifically changes that alter the programming of the facility would have to come back to the board. And then from a financial authority perspective, as recommended in the report, the project manager would have authority to make changes or variances, approved variances from $0 to $15,000, representing 0.05% of the project budget. From $15,000 to $100,000, or 3.3% of the project budget, the construction lead from the steering committee, who is at this time myself, would have authority to make those approvals. A subcommittee of the steering committee would have authority from $100,000 to $250,000, or 0.7% of the project budget, and anything exceeding $250,000 would require board approval. The report also outlines the process and procedures for construction package approvals and change orders following those same authority levels. Mr. Chairman, happy to answer any questions from members of the board.
Thank you, CAO. Inwood, any questions? Yes, Councillor Dobro.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Inwood, just one quick question. You described yourself as being the construction lead. What is the subcommittee for construction? Who does that consist of?
As it sits today, that is Mr. Harris and Mr. Hunt from McDougall and Parry Sound, respectively, with myself. We form the construction subcommittee today. We meet routinely with the project manager and are on top of the construction activities.
I just question where that leaves the other communities in having a say in any of these fundings, as we're also responsible through transparency to our ratepayers. Is the subcommittee a necessity, or could it be dealt with as the steering committee as a whole?
Frankly, it could be. The challenge being, once we move into construction activities, decisions are going to need to be made in a very timely fashion. Gathering all 6 members of the steering committee in an impromptu way may prove to be somewhat challenging at times. So that's why we've established the authorities we have, and requiring anything of significance coming back to the board. And just to add, and I did include this in the report as well, that of course there would be monthly reporting on any variances that would come to the steering committee and also to the board as we move through with routine project updates as we move into construction. So any significant changes, anything exceeding $250,000, would come back to this board for approval. So that's where yourself and the other members of the board, voting members of the board, would have an opportunity to weigh in on any sort of discussion.
I appreciate that, sir. Just 4 changes is $1 million. And that's a lot of money that they're coming from the taxpayers. And I'm not certain why in the sake of efficiency, and I don't know how inefficient it would be to get a electronic vote from your compatriots. But I think for the sake of transparency, it might lend itself best if we were doing it as all townships that are involved, so that it's not, the appearance just has a look that it's 3 people. And that's all I'm saying. I would like to see that amended to reflect all townships CAOs, if I could. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I might just provide some further information. What we're requesting is approval on variances within the budget. The defined detailed budget, which will be presented in the coming months as the project gets its legs and moves into detailed design, and we start to really nail down how much each of the various contracts will cost, will get their approvals from the board. So there will be a clear understanding of what the project budget is, and this is for variances outside of that. But happy to gather any feedback from the board members.
Thank you, Mr. Inwood. Reeve Liverance.
Yeah, I think a point of clarification. It was stated that 4 requests for change could be up to $1 million. I believe that the smaller group with Mr. Inwood with 3 changes would only be up to $300,000. The way this variance structure is set up in the report here, so it's not $1 million.
through the chair, just a brief response, if I might. What is recommended in the report through the steering committee's subcommittee is a range of anything from $100,001 to $250,000. So to Councillor Dobro's point, for changes that all reach the $250,000 mark could, however, if we have variances coming in at that number, I would suggest there's a bigger problem with our budget that will require further detail and further discussion.
Thank you. Should have asked for a mover and a seconder to have for the resolution to get it on the table first. May I have a mover, Councillor Fellner, seconded by Mayor Robinson, that the board delegate authority to commit, manage, and control project fund variances and escalation rules as outlined in the February 8th, 2023 Delegation of Authority report. Are there any further questions? Are you ready to call the vote?
Mr. Chairman, could I ask for a recorded vote in this matter, please?
Yes, you may, Councillor.
Thank you.
And Clerk Johnson, would you please call the recorded vote?
Yes, I'll take in a different order this time. Seguin Councillor Terry Fellner.
Yay.
Parry Sound Mayor Jamie McGarvey.
Yes.
McKellar Mayor David Moore.
No.
McDougall Mayor Dale Robinson.
Yes.
Carling Councillor L. Dubrow.
No.
Archipelago Reeve Bert Liverance.
Yes.
All right. So in our weighted vote system, the results is 10-2, carries.
That resolution is carried. Thank you very much, Clerk Johnson. And moving on to item 2.5 is the reports submitted to the steering committee on HST and charitable status update. And I believe that Parry Sound Director of Finance, Stephanie Phillips, is going to take us through that report. Stephanie,
Thank you. So back in June 2022, the board applied for designation as a qualified Dunny for a municipal body performing a function of government in Canada. And this is to issue official donation receipts. Also, we applied for a request for municipal determination or designation for GST, HST purposes back in June 2022. And the benefit of that is that it will allow the board to apply for HST rebates similar to a municipality for any expenditures that do not qualify for a 100% tax credit. So additional information was requested by the CRA in October, and that was provided. I've called for an update, and both the applications are still in progress and under multiple levels of review. So there's no outstanding information request on those items. So we're looking into, the town is looking into details regarding accepting donations and issuing tax receipts on behalf of the Municipal Service Board in the absence of that designation. So I hope to bring more information forward on that in the future. So there's the update. Does anyone have any questions?
Thank you, Ms. Phillips. I think I would like to read the resolution and get a mover and seconder. We'll get that on the table first for discussion. The resolution reads that the update report on application to Canadian Revenue Agency for designation as a commercial operation for HST purposes and a qualified charity for donation purposes be received for information purposes. I have a mover by Reeve Liverance, seconded by Mayor McGarvey. And now any questions for Ms. Phillips? I think it appears to be fairly straightforward. Thank you for your effort. And I will call the question. All in favor? Opposed, if any? And that motion is carried. Thank you very much. Item 2.6 on our agenda is the offer for a board orientation session submitted by the steering committee, and I believe that CAO Harris will speak to that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As CAOs, we're we organize orientation sessions for new council. That's part of our standard approach following an election. And we thought, given there are some new board members on the board, that this is a high-profile, important project to all our communities. We just wanted to ask the board if they would like us to organize an orientation session. It wouldn't have to be, but we've suggested perhaps at the Stocky Center. It's set up for presentations, and we could also invite the project manager, the architect team, and others as appropriate. So the board members not only get an update, some of the background to the project itself, but meet the people that are directly involved in delivering the project.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. I'd like to read the resolution and ask for a mover and a seconder of the resolution. We will read that the board indicates in the affirmative their desire to have an orientation session. May I have a mover for that resolution? Moved by Councillor Fellner and seconded by Councillor Doburo. And now any questions or comments? Mayor Moore.
Just wondering if that could be, you talk about board members, if that could be extended to all of the councils as well. There seems to be a lot of room there, and I think the council should be kept up to date as well, because they're certainly involved in decision-making for their individual municipalities.
To the chair, through the chair, that's that's completely up to this board and how big and if they want to include the councillors.
Mr. Harris, is it intended that that would occur virtually?
The discussion we had, Mr. Chairman, at the steering committee was that it would be in person.
Councillor Fellner.
Yes, just thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to Mr. Harris, I think it's an excellent idea myself personally, and I would very much be in favor to have the project manager and the architect invited. I think that would be very beneficial to the board to hear their what they feel that their vision for the project is. So I think it's more beneficial, quite frankly, for the board itself to meet with the steering committee. It is a smaller group. I think collectively we'll get, my own personal opinion is it's collectively we get enough, we'll get more out of it. And my function, one of my functions sitting on this board is to keep my fellow councilors apprised of what's going on. That's just a function of being on this board. So those are my comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Mayor Robinson.
Just a question to Mr. Harris. By the board, you're including the alternates as well in that session, I assume?
Through the chair, that was our expectation.
Yeah.
Right, so we'd have 2 representatives for each council. And I know for the purposes of receiving information, sometimes quorums of council don't interfere or whatever, but if we have all of council there, then we may run into that issue at some point in time, other than it being just informational. So as long as the alternate is included, then I'm okay with the resolution as it reads. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Moore.
I would argue with Mayor Robinson on that. It is for information purposes only. There's no decisions being made of council, so it's not a quorum situation. My experience has been sometimes communication is not passed back to the council or miscommunication. And I think if they hear things from at the ground level, I think that's much more helpful to them rather than hearing it through a representative.
Mayor Robinson, is that a legacy hand? Reeve Liverance.
I would ask that the option to attend virtually would also be considered, though.
Thank you. So the way that the resolution or the report was submitted would allow for a member and an alternate. So two members, representatives from each council, be included in the orientation. That's the way the report was submitted. Are you ready to vote? All in favor? Opposed, if any? And that is carried. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, just on that, so Rebecca will try to figure out some dates and see what works for the committee members, the board members.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harris. Item 2.7 is a verbal update from the fundraising committee, and I believe that Mayor McDermott and Mr. Culverwell are online with us this evening. Is there anything you'd like to share with us this evening?
Just a very brief update. The RFP for the professional fundraisers was released, and we have 3 confirmed bidders, and we expect their final proposals on February 22nd. It is my hope that we will have a recommendation of choice of professional fundraisers by your March meeting. We are working very closely with Stephanie, and I have to thank Stephanie for her work in getting the RFP out and with Stephanie's help, we need to get receipting for donations up and running. Hopefully Parry Sound as a municipality can step in until we get the CRA designation. We also are working very closely to get online donations happening through our website. The first event of some supporters will be happening in the second week of April, just after Easter. And I hope I will have some serious dollars from the community at that point. I do want to report that we have one anonymous donor who has committed $100,000 of matching money to community contributions. And so that will be happening as soon as we can do online donations. The big dollars that you have in your cash flow of $5 million by September, as you note in the RFP, it is a commitment to those dollars. May not be cash in hand by September, but our RFP is clear that capital comes first. And so once we have the professional fundraiser on side and you see what kind of contracts are expected from donors of over $1 million, I think you'll be reassured that the dollars will be coming, but they may not be in the bank on September. T-shirts from toddler sizes to extra large are available at White Squall. I expect at the next meeting, you'll all be wearing one. And I want to thank Stephanie for helping us through all of the steps. The questions have been raised from 3 of the bidders, and those questions will be replied to in the addendum going out this week. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you, Mayor McDermott, to you and members of the fundraising committee for your hard work. Are there any questions for Mayor McDermott?
Thank you. We understand our mandate, and we need some millions. So if any of you want to write a check, you'll all be invited to our event in April.
Challenge has been laid out. Thank you. There being no further business before the board this evening, I would like to thank you for your attendance this evening and your active participation. And I will call our meeting, adjourn our meeting at 8:15 p.m. Thank you very much, everyone. Stay safe.